Hi, this is the second in the video series I'm doing for the review for the AP Human Geography exam coming up. This will be for chapter two, which was demographics. And one of the things that you really need to kind of focus on this one is go back, remember your tools, and in particular, you got to remember what do they tell you about the people that information's been collected on. So that is something I'm going to kind of focus on to make sure when we're looking at demographic data, humans, the big thing to remember is that those tools will change over time. And so as countries go in through development and different stages of development, we can make some inferences based on what does that data tell us. So, for instance, just as an example, infant mortality rate is a really good indicator as to what is the quality of life in a country, what is perhaps their developmental level. Because if you have a really high infant mortality rate, the chances are you don't have access to proper medicines, you don't have access to proper hospitals. There's probably contaminated water in that the water is not clean. So that may indicate that you don't have sewer systems in place. It also very likely indicates the presence of tropical disease. And infants are very, very fragile creatures. And so it doesn't take much as far as contamination of the air or the water or the food, whether or not they have proper housing, whether if they get sick, is there something that you can take them to make them better? If you don't have access to this stuff, then the chances are your infant mortality rate is high. So if you're ever given data like that, where you're comparing countries, remember what all those tools tell you, depending on how you can compare them. Whereas a country where they have the health care, where there is clean water, sewer systems, proper housing, all that stuff, the chances are your infant mortality rate is going to be extremely low. You are very rarely losing your infants. They're able to grow up. And so they're probably not facing the same sort of problems that these babies from other countries are having. And you can see the same thing in fertility rates. As countries develop, the need to have large families begins to decline. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, that if you're an agrarian society, you need a lot of people on your farm to make that subsistence farm work. And so you have kids. And again, if disease is present, if you don't have a proper healthcare system and all that, the chances are that some of your kids are not going to survive to adulthood. And so families tend to be larger because the chances are some of your kids aren't going to make it. And again, that may sound really, really cold, but this is the sort of calculations that have to be made in developing countries. How many children are we going to need to maintain the farm? Now, when people move into the cities, moving from the farms to cities, oh, look, we're talking about now migration, right? Um, when they move into the cities, often what will happen is that the fertility rate doesn't change. The number of kids that they're having stays pretty much the same. The difference is that they now have access to clean water, sewage systems, proper housing, all that stuff, which means that the infant mortality rate drops. So when you're looking at that, you can kind of see, oh, look, the fertility rate's the same, but the infant mortality rate's declining. That probably means you're in a developing country. People are moving into the cities, and so you're seeing how urban life changes those numbers, and you can pick almost any of them, and you're going to see this process change. Life expectancy goes up. The more and more people are living in cities and having access to infrastructure. Literacy rates are going to go up because the reason why they're moving into the cities is that's where the jobs are that you can make money. And in order to make the money, you're going to have an education. You're going to have to be able to read and write and do math and stuff like that. So, as more and more people move into the cities, the literacy rate tends to go up. And so, I mean, pick your tool. It doesn't really matter which ones you pick. Death rates decline. Um, in countries that are developing or are developed at this point. And so the medical technology is there to keep older people alive. And so you'll have more and more of them. Therefore, your life expectancy goes up. The really funny thing is, of course, at the very end of the DTM and stuff, when you're looking at the death rates and stuff, they actually start going back up again because you have so many dang old people in your society. And as we have said before, old people are good at dying. And so if they make up a larger and larger percentage of your population, then guess what? Your death rate's going to go up. And so it's nothing about war or famine or anything else. You might see that little uptick in the death rate because simply there's a whole bunch of old people. The reason why I bring all this up is you've really got to pay attention to the DTM, that demographic transition model. Look at what's happening to all the tools at the various stages. Stage 1, agricultural. Everything that you would expect to be high because there's no infrastructure are high. Everything that is low is because you expect that that would not be important in an agricultural society, like literacy. So your literacy rate's probably at the very bottom, and your infant mortality is sky high, your death rate is sky high, your fertility rate's going to be sky high, so forth. As you go into that first stage of developing, people are moving to the cities, they're starting to get the factory jobs, the demographics begin to change. Now, at stage 1, agrarian, if you were looking at population pyramids, it kind of looks like a rocket. So it's long and skinny and narrow. There's a little thing that sticks out the top that looks like an antenna or something. And at the very bottom, it flares out like rocket fins. And if you look at that, you can say, wow, they're having a lot of kids, but boy, howdy, are they dying fast. And then it just goes straight up as a cylinder. And that means that if you survive those first couple of years, you stand a pretty good chance of living to the ripe old age of 25 or 30 or something. And then that's where the top of the rocket disappears. And it becomes that straight line because there aren't any old people because, again, life expectancy is really, really low. When you hit stage 2 of the DTM, that's the industrializing phase, people moving into the cities, getting access to the infrastructure. And so all the demographics begin to change. Literacy goes up. Eventually, you're going to start seeing the birth rate decline. You're going to see a life expectancy go up. Stage 3 is the developed stage. They have reached industrialization. And at this point, most of your population is sitting in cities doing city jobs. You have very few people perhaps left. Probably half of your population or less is still on farms. So at this point, everybody should have access to hospitals and clean water systems and power systems and all that fun stuff that you would get in a city. And because of that, this is where the fertility rate really begins to drop because people don't need big families anymore. As a matter of fact, they're an expense now rather than an asset. And so people make the very economic decision of we're not going to have 8 kids anymore. We're going to have far fewer because they're very expensive to raise. We have to send you to school. That means taxes. We have to house you. We have to feed you. And this all costs us money. So we're probably going to have fewer. And eventually you hit stage 4, where we're post-industrial. We're moving out of the industrial phase. We're becoming more service-oriented, more technologically oriented. And at this point, most of your family size is probably going to be 2 or less. And at that point, your population goes into decline because there's not as many people coming on to replace the people that are dying off. So when you look at that 4th stage, one of the things you're going to see is a very high life expectancy, very high literacy rate. Birth rate is going to be dead at the bottom. Infant mortality, very much at the bottom. You might see the death rate start climbing up because if you looked at the population pyramid, it's an inverted pyramid. You got a whole bunch of old people and not very many young people. And eventually that percentage of people at the top, they don't live forever. And so they start contributing to your death rate because they make up such a large percentage. Which brings me to another big topic that can come out of this that may apply to other things. When you're looking at demographics, look at gender because a lot of what we're looking at has to do with reproduction, for instance. And so when we're looking at demographics and gender, does this society promote birth or does it promote not having kids? And countries may choose to do either. We've talked about do it for Denmark. We've talked about the one child policy in China. It may well be that they want their fertility rates to shrink because they see that as a strain on their resources. They can't support that number of people. Whatever the reason is, they're trying to cut down on that fertility rate. So that may be free access to contraception. It could be all sorts of things. That isn't really a gender issue because that is something that falls on the shoulders of women. And so when you're looking at population policies, one of the things that should be in the back of your head is, ooh, is this a good gender issue thing? Because that could show up in an essay. And I could use those to explain a gender disparity in treatment of women in societies. Are they seen as sort of breeding machines that make the next group of humans? Or are they seen more integrated into society where they're doing jobs and stuff, and therefore there's not the expectation that they're supposed to have all these kids? Maybe they're only going to have the one, or maybe none at all. Maybe they'll decide to have poodles. Either way, that is something that impacts the gender issue that you may see that come out of this. So keep that in mind. There's also the ETM. That's the fun chart where you have 5 stages. There's 4 that are kind of seen as the real, and then there's a 5th one that is kind of speculative. But again, it always starts off with agrarian society. In agrarian society, if you're looking at the demographics, everything kills us. Our infant mortality rate is sky high. Our life expectancy is very low. Our death rate is very high. And it's because in an agrarian society, undeveloped society, everything literally can kill us. And we don't have the medical technology to keep people alive. And so we die young and we die in large numbers. Stage 2 is the construction of infrastructure, clean water systems, sewer systems, the beginning of hospitals and hygiene. We figure out that we should probably wash our hands before we start doing surgery on people and things like that. Now, you would think that we would have figured this out a while back, but honestly, it's not that far back in time. So most of our time was probably stage 1. Stage 2, your economic elites are starting to build roads and bridges and water systems and stuff like that because they want to make more money, and they need the infrastructure to do that. So at that stage, we began to develop that infrastructure, which, by the way, also helps our urban populations live longer, and therefore our life expectancy starts going up. The infant mortality starts dropping, our death rate starts dropping. But what kills us changes. It's not just everything like pandemics and epidemics, disease is present everywhere. Now it tends to be infections. That something gets infected, an infection starts in some organ. We really don't have the technology to deal with it. We've started surgery, very simple surgeries, but they're probably not very helpful. In many cases, you can't remove the kidneys that are infected because that person's going to die. Anyway, so that's stage 2. Stage 3, we develop antibiotics, we develop proper surgical conditions and things. We began starting the early organ transplants like kidneys and livers and stuff, which are a little more simple than other organs. So with the development of antibiotics, infection doesn't necessarily kill us anymore. And so that doesn't become the big killer. Now it becomes something else. And at stage 3, we are looking at cancer. That environmental things or biological things are causing cancers in us. And we're now living long enough in order to die from cancer. I know that's not exactly the happiest news ever, but that's what we're facing. This becomes the big killer. And so at this point, maybe we can do some surgeries to physically remove the cancers that might help, but it's still going to be the big killer until we get to stage 4, which is when we develop the technologies to deal with these cancers. And we also improve organ transplants. Instead of just being livers and kidneys and stuff, we can now transplant lungs, hearts, eyeballs, all skin, all sorts of stuff we can now transmit to somebody else. And so we have a higher survival rate. And again, if you're looking at the demographics, our life expectancy is going up and our death rates are going down because we can medically treat people better. If we've got cancer under control, and that seems to be right where we're at. We are coming very close to being able to treat most cancers. That means something else killing us, and guess what? It's going to be genetic diseases now. These are the things that may have triggered the cancers in the past, but there's something in our genetic structure that has become distorted in some way, and that's what's killing us now. It's spina bifida. It's could be any of a number of things. So that fourth stage, the thing that we're trying to develop is gene therapies. We're trying to figure out how to fix the DNA in us so that we're not dying of those diseases. One of which, if you kind of think about it, and it's weird, is death itself. Because death itself has to do with our own cells dying, right? Well, that may be something that we can fix on a genetic level. If you want something scary to think about, we may be able to engineer our own immortality. That's scary. However, if you believe in the fifth stage, that is, again, the theoretical one, most geographers will take the very negative view of what happens at stage five is all the diseases that we thought we overcame, all the infections that we thought we overcame come back with a vengeance. They are now disease resistant, they're antibiotic resistant, we can't fight them off anymore, and they have globalized because they're moving all over the planet. So the new tuberculosis that is currently percolating in different parts of the world that are drug resistant and we can't treat, sooner or later are going to start spreading all over the globe. And guess what? We're back to the realm of pandemics and epidemics, just like at stage one again. That is generally seen as the future. And there are some questions as to whether that's going on right now. Don't know, but it makes a great essay topic, perhaps. So something to think about. We may see an essay, let's say, on the ETM or the DTM, or comparing the two and things like that. What you can tell from each. Let's see. Carrying capacity and overpopulation. These terms often come up. Overpopulation is when whatever the population, in this case probably humans, exceeds the carrying capacity of that region or the planet to support that number of people. And so eventually you're going to have starvation, famine, whatever. We can't support that number of people. It's usually referred to as overpopulation, but most people think that just means it's a whole bunch of people, and that's not necessarily true. The region may be able to support a huge population. So it's not overpopulated. There's just a whole bunch of people there. It's when you exceed the carrying capacity of that region or that planet that you got a problem, because now you have too many for the resources that are there. And I think I gave the example of like Southern California, Los Angeles. That region, based on its water supply and climate and vegetation and stuff, really only ought to support a population of about 50,000. And there's, I believe, last time I checked, probably about 12 million people living in the LA region alone. So we've long since expanded beyond the carrying capacity. But going back to possibilism, we can change the environment. We can bring in water through irrigation systems and stuff to support that population. So again, going back to chapter one, we can pull some of those ideas and then answer a question like carrying capacity over population. And this gets us into Malthus and talking about the Malthusian economics of at some point we can't produce enough food to support a growing population. Therefore, food wise, we exceed our carrying capacity and we begin to starve to death in fighting over whatever food remains. Again, end of civilization. And then you can explain that with the other stuff that we've talked about. You have the anti-Malthusians that say that is all foolish, that technology has always come to our rescue. And so whatever resources that we might be running out of, we will find some way to more efficiently produce more of that, or find some way to make more out of it, of something that maybe we haven't been able to use before. But we will find more of those resources to support that larger population. Then you have the neo-Malthusians going, oh, well, it could be anything, right? Anything, any resource that you can think of that we're dependent on. Power systems, thinking about water systems, you need fresh water. What if we run out of fresh water? That could wipe us out too, couldn't it? Or more and more, we are very dependent on specific metals and minerals to make our world go. Imagine shutting all the computer systems down. And what would that do to global trade and where you're going to get your food at the nearby Kroger's when none of the computers work anymore? That could trigger something. So, again, we may be looking at a resource that's no longer there, that we have used it up, which then gets us into things like sustainable versus unsustainable. If we are doing things in an unsustainable way, we will eventually run out of that resource and maybe trigger a neo Malthusian meltdown of society. Whereas if we do things in a sustainable manner where we will have that resource in the future for as far as we can see, then maybe that's the better way to go. We will not have that or as much a chance of a meltdown like that. So that's something to think about. Again, the other thing that comes out of here is thinking about why people are where they are. Demographically, you'll see dense populations. Think about climate, topography. We like flat. We like coastal areas because we can trade as well as fish. We like access to fresh water so we can farm and water our animals and water our humans and take a shower every now and then, stuff like that. We like that stuff. We don't like deserts. We don't like mountains. We don't like jungle. We don't like swamps. We don't like it too cold, like at the poles. We don't like it too hot, like at the equator. So again, think about demographically, what maybe is that showing you if you're looking at those numbers and density in particular. Why are the people there as opposed to over there? Why is this group have such a high level of development? This group doesn't have so much development. Is there a physical connection maybe? It could be that this one is on the coast and this one's landlocked. The one on the coast is more developed. The one that's landlocked is least developed. Stuff like that. Anyway, I think I have pretty much touched on everything that I would really want to touch on here. So I will leave this as the second video, and thank you for watching.